We will now continue the program with the focusing on research assessment, and I would like to give the floor to Anna Nilsson Vindefjärd, Secretary General of Research Sweden and Vice President of EuroScience, who will lead a panel on aligning research assessment with open science. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you very much, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here with this whole full room and all of you that are participating online. Welcome. EuroScience is a European not-for-profit association of individual researchers, science professionals, and everyone interested in science and its role in society. The goal of EuroScience is an open, inclusive, and healthy European scientific system that works for the benefit of all of society. The association works to advance science and science practice, as well as science policy, through communication, open discussion, and collaboration of all stakeholders of science. EuroScience is an association open to everyone who wishes to make a change in science and its role in society. We will begin this session with a keynote on aligning research assessment with open science to set the stage. After that, we'll hear how research funders are developing their assessment methods and how publishers are exploring ways to secure quality in open science. In this panel discussion, we'll make room for questions from the audience, so please use the Mentimeters to interact with us during the session. And I have my good colleague, Matthias Giraud, Secretary General for EuroScience here, and he will be in charge of handing over the questions to the panel. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome our keynote, Professor Nicolas Fressengeas, who is the Vice President for Open Science at the University of Lorraine, leading all areas of open science at the university. He is also an expert on open science at the French Ministry of Higher Education and Research. Please, Nicolas.
Thank you very much, Anna, for the introduction, and very sorry not to be here with you in Stockholm. My flight has been cancelled yesterday, and thank you very much for the technicians over there for handling this in a very, very short time to allow me to be there virtually. So I'm going to talk to you about aligning research assessment with open science, as seen from the views from inside my university as the vice president for open science in this university. So my talk will be divided in 3 parts. So first part, I'm going to talk to you about what's going on from my view in my university at the researcher level. What are the issues faced? And the second part will be the issues for my university. And finally, we have already talked about coalitions on advancing research assessment, which is, to my view, the way we can move forward. So what's going on at the researcher level? We have diverging incentives at the researcher level, which tend to block the progress on open science, as we have seen today. What are the diverging incentives? The first thing is that we have, I think, to acknowledge that open science, opening the science takes time and energy. Why? When we want to share outputs of our research, it takes additional works and additional skills. I've spotted a recent publication on that says that it is acknowledged that additional time and effort is needed compared to closed research. So why? If you look at the data, for instance, openness of data, then you have to do some pre-registration saying if you have to do some project, what are you going to do with the data? You have to write data management plans. And then once you have done the research, then you have to share your research outputs. So you have to share the papers, you have to share the books, the data and software and source code and make your data fair and so on. that's not the only thing. It's already been said that you can also open the research processes themselves to make them inclusive and transparent. And if you want to do all that, then you have to develop new skills. And this is something that has to be improved. So the incentives to do that, well, they drive any woman's or man's work. So in the same paper, they said that there's a tendency to underestimate the additional workload that is devoted to open research. So basically, and it has already been said this morning, the basic thing is to develop clear incentives that allow researchers to choose among the many tasks they have to do, choose the one that allow to make the data fair, for instance, or to share their paper open, and to grow in knowing how to do that. So that's one thing. What can we do with incentives? So I'm going to talk to you about the things, how they're done in France, but I guess it's pretty much the same thing in the other countries. The motion speed towards open science, if I look at different entities, funders and universities and so on, they're not the same. They're not the same. So if you look at what's happening in a researcher's daily life, they have an individual assessment. So when they could do their PhD, when they're hired, and when they are looking for promotion. But that's not the only one way of being assessed. You have also collective assessment for your laboratory or for university or other research performing organization. And again, on a daily life, you also make projects and you are want to have funds for this project, and you have a large variety of project funders. So how do we handle this? Well, it's quite difficult at the researcher level today because we have a variety of assessors and a variety of incentives. So how do we handle this? Well, it's difficult at the on the researcher side. So today, well, they're not as angry as I written here. They used to be, but it's a little bit better now. So a few years ago, if I look in my discipline and in my country, so my discipline is physics and my country is France. Well, a few years ago, we had a clear rejection of doing open science. And why was it the case? Well, the case it was because if you did that, if you took time to do all what we've talked about, then the hiring and promotion expectancies in my university, in my country, were not met. So we don't have time to do that if we are evaluated and assessed to on something else. So today it's a little better, fortunately. So open science benefits in my university, they're starting to be understood. But everything is not solved because if you look here around my university, then the funding agency we have in France, they have included open science expectancies in their way of assessing. And well, they have high open science expectations. But if you look at collective and individual assessment, well, the open science expectations are less and expectations are on another side. Let's talk about impact factor, for instance. So, well, that doesn't make things easy. So now, if I look at my university, so what should we do as a vice president? Should we behave? Well, what we know, what we see, is that the research assessment turn is to be done, is ahead. The question is, how do we handle this turn? There is clearly in the university a consensus that a research assessment change is needed. So why? We already talked about it. We have diverging incentives. We have lack of rewards for many research outputs. Reward is actually presently on papers, not necessarily open ones. And we have data, we have software codes, we have many other things, and there's a lack of reward for that. And there's also a lack of rewards for other research activities, such as going to the public and opening data and so on. But open science, and it is important to see that it's only one part of the scene of assessment. And it's been said this morning, they're also linked, but you know, we have scientific integrity issues, which is linked also to open science, but not only, and which should be included in a way of reforming assessment. We have research valorization, which can be economic and which is not antinomic to open science. We can be not economic, and you also have communication outside academia, and I've put dots there because there are probably many other parts of research which I've forgot. Okay, so my feeling today is that the steering wheel of research assessment is quite a bit stuck if we stay at the university level. Why? The university is okay for a change, but the question is, okay, we change, but where to? We see that we have a consensus that the change is needed, but we have no clear idea, and let aside consensus, on where to go. What are the changes to be made? So what are the issues there? Issues there, for one of them is the question of skills and time. So we need assessors to do the assessment, and the assessors we have in hand in our university are not well aware of what's going on the open science side. So we have a skill gap for assessors to fill, increase formation, training, and so on. We have talked about that this morning. But assessing better takes more time. It's easier to look at the number of publications, the number of citations, and so on, that to Carol said that just before, than to look at what's your contribution in that, what's your contribution in that. It takes more time. And finally, the assessors we need in the university to assess, well, they're not so easy to find. They're not so easy to find, they're not so numerous. So if we ask them to train before assessing, we don't know if we will find enough. That's a tricky task. So, and finally, we need a coordination with other research partners, because researchers in France, but everywhere, are assessed by various organisms. They are assessed by university, at the state level, by project funders like Horizon Europe, for instance, and they are assessed also worldwide. So we need coordination with all that, because we cannot move all alone, our university. So let's try to negotiate the turn. How can we do that? What we feel, and it's been said also this morning, that coalitions are needed. So we have to have coalitions of university, of performing research organization at a national level, and also, of course, at the European level. And I said, put in parentheses, at least, because if it was wider, then it would be even better. We need to find the pertinent criteria. And today it's not met. We don't have a consensus on that. So we have to find this criteria, and well, this should be evidence-based, well, based on research. So the criteria, I put a few things I could think of here. They have to be quality-based. We have talked about this morning, but how do we make criteria on your contribution as objective as possible? Because it was the illusion of objectivity was attributed to counting citations and so on. And now that we have an objection, which is, okay, no, what you are doing now is subjective. And how do you make this as objective as possible? And it can be different for each discipline. And finally, we would need a coordinating training of assessors, as just said before. Why? Because we need to have as large coordination as possible, European, worldwide, mutual training so that anybody can train the others. And what we would need also is help find assessors. So I don't know, I don't have any idea for the moment, but the question of finding assessors is really a tricky one. So if we want to change that, we would need a coalition, and these coalitions have been talked about this morning. So you know I will be talking about Carrara, but first let's have a look at the French assessment diversity, which I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but in our university, in our country, we have for individual assessment, we have local and nationwide step. So if we want to hire someone in our university, we have two steps. One step is discipline specific, nationwide. And then afterwards, you have to have another step in the university, which is local and not discipline specific. If we look at promotions, then we have two steps. One step is nationwide, and the other one is local, but transdisciplinary, not specific to a discipline, and it's done with the same application file. If you look at national research organization, then each of them has its own assessment process. Now, if I have a panorama in France, only in France, then we have over 100 ways of performing research assessments. So the trick here is to coordinate this. So it's on its way, but only on the start of its way. What about collective? So collective assessment, here in France, we have the Haut Conseil de l'évaluation de la recherche et de l'enseignement supérieur, so the High Council that evaluates research and higher education all over the country, so it's nationwide. It assesses every collective research organization. For that part, we have a great tool for coordination. So it's a big institution that has that wants to make progress, that has signed Carrara and Dora and so on, but the progress is starting. And what about project assessment? Project assessment, we have national funding agencies, a few of them. The leader one is the national one, and they have built a common road towards open science, and the assessment coordination is also on a good start, but only starting. And we also have to talk about the coordination on the university about project assessment. For the moment, each university, each organism has its own way of assessing projects. So that makes a lot of different things to do. So let's coordinate. How could we do that? First of all, we have built French national coordination. So that's a nationwide coordinated group, so with the High Council on Evaluation, with the universities, with the national research organism, the funding agencies, and any other institution with had signed DORA. That's a coordination which is a year old. So it started actually in the end on 2021. And was at the heart of the organization of the Paris Open Science Conference in 2022, which launched the Paris Call on research assessment. And this coordination in France is starting to evolve toward a French national chapter of CORA. So we believe that this coordination on a nation basis is essential because the ministry, which is not within this, is also concerned. So we have to organize this coordination within the country, and probably it's the same thing in other countries. So COARA, I won't talk a lot about this because it's already been mentioned this morning, but all know about that. It's a European-wide and beyond coalition started by Europe, but open to the rest of the world if anybody wants to join. The fact that it is bottom-up built is very important, is because we include the researchers in the way they design, the way they want to be assessed. So as already said, it's a European initiative, which is open worldwide. Today we have around 500 European institution members, or it's only a month old. But I think may respond to the majority of the previous concerns on the researcher level and at the university level. So it's a good thing that is started here. One final thought about that is, if you are changing the way research is assessed, I feel that we are tampering with just the very heart of the machine, because researchers will respond to incentives, and depending on disciplines, depending on the interaction between researchers in any country, in every country, if we change the way they're assessed, we will change the way they interact. And it's a very, very complex system. So tampering with the heart of the machine may change the behavior of the research machine, the worldwide research machine. So it could have unforeseen effects. So it already had, because the assessment as it is done today was certainly the problems that we have in an assessment that is as it is done today was not probably the goal a few years ago when it was set up. So we have to be very cautious because it's an extremely complex system. So how could we handle that? How could we handle this extreme caution and yet do something? Because it's not because we have to be cautious that we have to stay stuck. So we want to do something. Let's take a look at the COARA 10th commitment. If we look at it's the last one. The last one, but one of the most important one, I think. If you look at that, you said that we want to evaluate practices, criteria, and tools based on solid evidence and state-of-the-art research on research. So in our community, we are researchers, and we have researchers that do research on the very process of research itself, so that we can make research on the research process itself, so as to have evidence of gathering of evidence, and this gathering of evidence could end up in data that could be openly available to many people. So what we need, I feel, is that we have research needed on the process of research assessment using actual researchers on that, actual scientists on that team. So we already have what this is called meta-science, research on research. We already have meta-science initiatives in many countries and in many disciplines, but they are not that much coordinated. For example, in France, we have over a little less than 100 disciplines in higher education, but we don't have in these 100 meta-science. So, well, that's a whole. So what I feel is that cross-country and cross-discipline coordination is needed. So it would allow to fuel what we're talking about, research assessment advances with evidence-based state-of-the-art knowledge, but it could fuel also open science policies in the general term, open data, open software and source code, and as all research is made for, it could also fuel unforeseen applications as of today. So that's for a scientific approach to performing research assessment. And finally, I will conclude on giving a note on the ministry gathering, the science and technology gathering of the G7 that was happening in this weekend. So it ended on Sunday. And the science and technology minister communique is just out. It went out this weekend. And I took just an extract from this. And you see that the G7 supports immediate open and public access to government-funded scholarly publication scientific data. So that goes worldwide, what we're talking about now. And I didn't put it in a highlight color because it's not about research assessment, but you saw that we are talking, the G7 is also promoting interoperability and sustainability of infrastructures, as we just talked this morning. And it supports the incentives on research assessment. And if you look at the detail, they support COARA, so that's a good sign. And they also support research on research, aiming at helping to shape a more effective evidence-based research policy. If you look at the details of the text, it's of course a support of a backup of COARA and the promotion and incentive, so it goes to the G7, but even worldwide, so outside G7. So if I want to conclude, I feel there are issues and obstacles at the level of the university, at the local level, but I feel also that the issues of this obstacle are starting to be leveraged because because the community, French one, European one, and the worldwide one is starting to coordinate, and that's pretty good news. So thank you very much, and happy to participate in the panel.
Thank you so much, Nicolas, for that thorough run-through of aligning research assessment at different levels with open science. Now, it's my pleasure to invite my other speakers on stage, Katarina Bjelke, who is Director General, Swedish Research Council, Dagmar Meyer, Policy Advisor at the European Research Council Executive Agency, and Max Dumoulin, Vice President, Portfolio Innovation at Elsevier. Welcome. And of course, we're all interested in hearing what you're doing at your different organizations, but let's first start to give you a chance to react to what has been said. Would you like to start, Katarina?
Yes, of course. I sympathize, of course, with a lot of things that has been said. Many good points. This is, as has been said before, a cultural change, but we all have to be careful, I think, as also was mentioned from the speaker, not to disrupt the assessment system in a way that doesn't benefit high quality in research. These changes must, of course, be globally and should and must be developed by the research community itself, as I see it. So many interesting points that you pointed to. Thank you.
Thank you. Dagmar?
Yes, basically I can fully subscribe to what you said. I mean, it's very important that we don't pour out the baby with the bathwater, as we say. So by trying to promote open science, not just open access, but open science in a much broader context, we should always make sure that we maintain the principle of quality or excellence, as we like to, the term we like to use at the ERC. What I found interesting in the presentation was that it started off at a rather negative note, basically saying, well, moving towards open science means extra effort, extra workload, extra energy, extra skills, and so on. That is, of course, true, but only at first sight and only in a short sight. Because if you make all these investments, and of course there is a startup investment to be made, but you will reap the benefits in the long term. And I think that's always very important to keep in mind, that this is not just something, an extra burden, full stop, but it's an investment in the future, and it's an investment into improving the quality of research.
Yeah,
and you've done it. Yeah.
A good point, and I'm thinking that the challenge lies in the researcher as one person, the individual seeing that reward coming. When is it coming? Because as a collective, it's easy to see that, but it might be harder on an individual researcher, possibly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Max?
Yeah, thank you. And it was a great talk by Nicolas, and many great points were made. And I think also what Dagmar said, I support as well. It's, but I think from our point of view, I think we do need to keep supporting the traditional values of quality that we've had in the past, also with different models, but also looking for new ways, looking for data sets, looking for all kinds of other ways of rewarding research. And this is something that also very poignant by Nicolas. There are different disciplines, there are different countries, there are different ways of doing this. And what's really great is this new tendency to have these narratives and supported by evidence, which I think is very important. And if we do that well, and if we use proper metadata conventions and all those kinds of things to sort of knit it together, I think we can support those incentives, but we can also hopefully prevent a lot of work for the researchers, so that it's actually something that can be done. And we are hopefully looking forward to taking a role in that. So it's also a very exciting challenge, I would say.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about the role of the publishers as we move on in this discussion. I'd like to just throw one thing at you really quickly. You know, you hear off and on researchers saying, and often very well accomplished researchers in terms of publications, that no, we can't leave the old system, it'll hurt quality, this is the only way we know, and we're almost afraid of this open science. What will happen to quality? What do you say when you meet that kind of argument? Anyone?
Yeah, if I may. Well, we're talking about culture change, and that is always very difficult, and it takes time. And it's probably, in a way, I mean, we don't want to wait until the old generation has left the stage and the new are taking over, but I mean, there is some hope there anyway. I think it's a question also of making sure that people understand what quality really means. And quality is not well, maybe there is some kind of correlation, but quality is not the same as high impact factors or a high prestige journal or a glamorous journal or a glamorous publisher. We really have to look at the intrinsic value of the research that is being published. And of course, that takes, again, effort, also effort then on the side of the evaluators, if we're talking about research assessment. But this is really what we're talking about. We're talking about quality publications. We're not talking about glamour and indicators, etc., etc. We're talking really about the content of the research. And this, of course, also, as Nicolas said, requires also training and awareness raising at the level of the evaluators, of the assessors, making sure that also the resources are available for a more in-depth assessment that really looks at the content and not just at the packaging, etc. So, but I think if those framework conditions are provided, then it should not be too difficult really to move into the right direction.
Thank you. Katarina?
Yeah, I think I mean, you have to acknowledge that the system so far has served the community well, but a lot has happened in the world. And I mean, as of now, more people and the demands on the researchers to be open and to contribute to society in a much broader way it is much more obvious these days than it has been before, where maybe you thought of the university and the knowledge inside it just for the students and just for the university itself. We're not there anymore, so we have to change the system in a smooth and harmonized way, I would say. So yeah.
And I think also when you talk about quality, you could also talk about qualities and about things that are important, things that we would like to have from the academic system. And one of it could be, of course, new knowledge, and it could be by publishing in journals. And of course, we're happy to support and keep supporting that. But there are other things. Open science, for example, reproducibility is an important quality as well, just as equitability in the system, inclusivity, those kinds of things. So I think, and of course, it's not our role to determine what is really important. We're just there to support whatever has been decided. But I think to very important initiatives such as Quora, the question of why, what are the qualities, and what's the sort of the value, but also the norm of quality within those qualities, if you can still follow me. I think that's really important as well as all the different practices and disciplines and countries. So yes, it's a huge challenge, but if we allow people to create their own narratives and we're just there to support them with evidence, then I think we have a chance of making the system better.
Thank you. I would like to ask our two the representatives for research funding. So you look at projects that apply for funding. Are you changing the way you look at projects? Would you like to share that with us?
Should I start? Well, as it is, we believe in the Swedish Research Council that we have a robust and well-functioning assessment system today, and it has evolved during time, I would say. It's driving quality, but of course we have to adapt it all the time, and we have to look at what is important to really see to that we really assess the quality in a good way. As of now, we are then the application for research. We have the criteria which we feel are important: the scientific quality of the project, of course, the novelty and originality, merits of the applicant, and the feasibility. We have signed Quora, and we are working together we are involved in that development. But even before the Quora was initiated, we started a project within the Swedish Research Council to oversee the system of assessing research for funding purposes then, because the assessment is, of course, different if you should assess for a position or if you apply for funds for research. And there we have to collaborate, and I know also the Swedish universities are working together in assessing also, or looking at the assessment system at the universities, and we have to work together, of course, nationally, as was mentioned also so by the speaker. We have so far not recently, because of the recent discussions, implemented any major changes in our system. We have looked into good examples from other countries, and we are discussing a lot about narrative CVs, for example. We have a limited number of publications presented already. We use metric in a very responsible way, not looking at them too much, but there is still one of many things that you can look at. So that is where we are at the moment.
Ongoing
process. A lot engaged in what's happening in Europe, of course, and globally, because that's extremely important that we go hand in hand with the system. So
maybe hand in hand with Dagmar.
Yes.
Yes,
So.
actually, a lot of what you said really made a lot of sense to me also in the context of the ERC. So just like the Swedish Research Council, we believe that our assessment process is already pretty good. But of course, that something is pretty good and has proved to be good, and as it's also reflected in a number of indicators where you can see that we are actually selecting very good projects and very good researchers to implement those projects. You constantly have to reflect and think, is it what we're doing? Can we just continue doing the same thing? Or maybe the circumstances, the environment has changed, certain factors have changed. Maybe we need to make some adjustments and some tweaks to the way we actually select the grants. And this has been happening, so pretty much in parallel to the process that was happening at the European level, for which ultimately ended in the culminated in the creation of COARA. The ERC Scientific Council has also set up a task force on research assessment to really in-depth look into all our processes and procedures and to see, is there anything that maybe we could improve on and where we could maybe also align it to the new developments that are happening. I don't really want to say to align it to open science, because it's not like aligning to open science. Open science should always be a means to an end. Open science is part of what you're doing, and opening up processes, opening up the way, let's say, incentivize people to do their research in a more open way is part of a bigger picture. So I don't really terribly like this idea of aligning assessment to open science. It's like, well, anyway. And so as a result of the work of the task force, the ERC will make some changes, and these have already been announced, and I'm sure many of you have actually read or heard about them. So we're making some changes in the way the selection procedure is happening as of the work program 24. So for this year, we're still following the old procedures. And basically, without going into too many details, the idea is that there will be more flexibility. We have always said only a limited number of publications. It's quality over quantity. We're not as strict anymore. Do they have to be from the last 10 years? We leave it more open to the researchers. The most recent, the most relevant publications, or not only publications, research outputs much more generally, they can put forward. This is, of course, important to stress it. It's not only about publications. We have combined the CV and what we call the track record, also eliminated some factors from the CV that are really not relevant for what we're doing, and you shouldn't be asking for information that then actually doesn't enter the process. For example, how many PhD students have you supervised? It's not really part of our assessment criteria, so why ask about it in the CV? So we have really cleaned up the CV part. We're now asking for these 10 relevant outputs that should be relatively recent. And then also examples of peer recognition that demonstrate that the researcher will actually be able to implement that ambitious project that he or she is putting forward. And for these examples, the applicants are invited to provide a short narrative in which they actually explain what has been their role in this output, Or why is that recognition, peer recognition that they received, why is it actually relevant for the application process? And then in addition to that, we also encourage applicants to provide further information about significant life events, activities to the benefit of the scientific community, the research community that they have engaged in order to provide context to the evaluation.
Right.
But these are not evaluated as such. You don't get brownie points for them. But it allows the assessment panel to have a more rounded view of the researchers. So that's the idea behind it.
Thank you. One part, you said, well, I know a lot of funders say, well, give us your 10 chosen articles, and now preprints are coming in as a way to show the latest. And there's a discussion about preprints. It's a good vehicle of getting knowledge out there fast. And we have a very recent case of COVID. And I would like to ask Max, because Elsevier did a very interesting study with regards to the quality of preprints during COVID. Would you like to share some of the data there with us?
Yes, well, what we've seen, of course, is that preprints have become much more important in the communication flow. And I think this is really important because preprints clearly are a bit of a strange output, right? I mean, in some disciplines, it's quite normal and people trust each other and they use the preprints as something that for the next research as well. But now we see also in health and medicine that preprints have come up a lot. And I think this is very good, a good policy, because what we see is that those preprints are being used. They lead to earlier feedback. They lead to quicker times, and that's also why all our journals allow that you can at the same time or before have a preprint. And I think that's important. Just like data sets, you should have those separate from the article and share them as much as possible. So I think that's another quality that we can add to this equation and make sure that that is available early and widely. Yeah.
And are you sharing the results of this study with the European Commission in June? But is there, because the question was really, was it bad or poor quality? Was it, what do we have in these preprints? Because there was some stuff out there that maybe shouldn't have been used, and from different parts, if you're not a researcher yourself within that field, it may be hard to assess, can I trust this or not trust it, and so on. So that's also part of the discussion, but maybe that's not open yet, that data from the study.
Well,
are we looking forward to it later, or?
I'm not really sure about that study. What we do see, of course, is that preprints are for people in the know, extremely valuable and extremely useful, and we should support them. At the same time, we also know that there are people who are, let's say, outside research and are skeptical about research and its findings, and they've abused preprints, right? That should not disqualify or dismiss the use of preprints at all. But there is definitely there's a danger there, and I think what's really important is that I think there are also panels today about research information and communication. That's very clear. That preprints have a very important role. They're perfect. They are upcoming, and there's a lot of potential. But there is also a little bit of a downside, and only a little bit. But we have to be cautious of that and make sure. That within our communications, also in collaboration with journalists, for example, but of course we know that they're also being bypassed on the internet, that it's clear that preprints are not peer-reviewed yet, and that sometimes there can be an issue.
Right, thank you. And Nicolas, I have not forgotten you. I know you're there, and I appreciate it. I'm going to get to you within a few seconds, and also I'm going to get to your questions in a few seconds. But there was a question raised a number of times actually this morning about the cost of publishing, and their voices raised against publishers charging researcher for publishing with open access. There was also discussion on with, how do we do that? Should it be non-profit, but we still need to have a rigorous process in order to maintain quality? And do we have assessors, evaluators, and that whole system? So how do we how do we move on, and what is your view as a publisher on this transition and this discussion going on?
Good question. Yeah, no, there were some interesting challenges also this morning, and I think costs are a challenge, and we should not run away from that. We are also transforming, and I hear your comments. We're definitely hoping that we're moving in the right direction. A lot needs to be done. So we have about 2,800 journals, 700 are fully open access, so that's growing. We even have 130 diamond journals, so we're also capable of working with that. So we're not against experimentation. Of course, the costs need to be covered, and this is something that we're working with at the moment. And these are challenging times when it comes to that. For us, it's really important that we're competitive when it comes to cost. So I think that's very important to us. If we every journal that we compare with another similar journal, we want to be definitely not more expensive, if possible cheaper, and also work with institutions to have the best model for them. But it's a challenge, and we don't have all the answers yet. And what we do see is that globally, there are definitely countries and institutions and also people who would like to have choice. And that's another challenge that we have. So it's just flipping the whole system is also difficult. So
well, let's move over and see what the institution says. Well, thank you for opening up. Because
it's a difficult question, Anna, and yeah? I wish the answer were there. Then I would just give it to you.
But I think we all know it's not really there yet.
It's not there
a lot of these processes are actually ongoing. But Nicolas, for example, what do you say? What would you like to ask or comment with regards to this?
To the coast. With regard to the coast, in my university, that's one of the main issues about open access. For the moment, we have kept the cost of closed access. I mean, we have to keep the cost on read agreements with the publishers, because we don't have yet, and it's far from there, 100% open access. So we have to keep the old cost, and we are also to the transition towards open access, and the great problem that we have in the university is APCs, because it's a cost that is rising, that is not driven by the university. The view we have on how many APCs are spent is quite difficult, and we have lab directors coming. How am I going to pay for that? And we also are cautious about transformative agreements. So what we try to do now is try to support diamond open access, but yes, it's limited because we have all the three costs here. So what kind of question? Well, I heard it was not yet solved, and yes, I'm agree with that. We have to think about it, but again, it's a question of coordination, and perhaps my question would be, how about diamond open access, and how could this be actually funded if it's free for the author, free for the reader, and could we have a collaboration with the publishers to fill this diamond open access?
Quick answer if you want to, and then we move on to the audience.
Yes, please.
Answers.
The answer is yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yes, let's talk about it.
So a hand is reached out, and a hand is met by another hand. So that's good. So I would like to open up now for any questions. If I see a hand now, I'll grab it. Otherwise, I'll turn to Matthias. Matthias, have you received any interesting questions?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of going on here in the in the virtual audience. I'm trying to group some questions. I have to say, many interesting discussion is going around team science. So many people are actually asking also in regards of incentives, how, for example, can research teams be assessed, research teams to be awarded, moving away from individual careers, and also to value roles in these teams, for example, data steward, for example, open access data curators and so on and so forth. So I would like to ask the panel how do you see that? Maybe starting, of course, with the two funding agencies, how these things are assessed and how are you working on it?
Should you start?
It's interesting that you say starting with the funding agencies. I mean, we do not, the ERC funds individual researchers and their teams, which they are free to put together themselves. But we are not assessing teams as such when we award the grants. So I do think that it is an important question, but I don't think it's really, we are the right address for this particular question. Now, maybe to look at it slightly more generally, of course, once you have the grant, once the project is running, in most cases, you will have a smaller or bigger team. And then the question is whether you are actually capable of keeping that team together, make sure that the right people get the right jobs, and so on and so on. And that, well, to some extent, it's the quality of the PI, but we do not assess it as such. But we look at what have you done previously that could convince us that you are able to pull off that ambitious new project that you are planning to do. And if that is a project that requires a lot of teamwork, then of course you will also look at how did this work in the past, but we don't look at it in this explicit way.
Did Katarina want to?
Well, we assess research environment, but in general, that's. Can you ask the question again? But how to evaluate the whole environment? You mean?
Yeah, and in general, the whole environment, and how also the research teams can be evaluated and become incentives for individual careers, or can be positively or negatively seen in metrics, but also in assessment.
But this is part of evolving the system or changing the system right now, actually, because we are doing those evaluations already, but on in the way that we have done them so far, and in that sense, I think this will also evolve with more narratives and more. Asking the people to explain to the assessors how they contributed in different ways to create the environment, and also to have the high quality in the environment. So.
Thank you. Max?
Maybe I think also was said this morning about the point about data stewards, and I think that's a very important point. Maybe this new open science requires some new roles, and they need to be recognized. So I think it's a very good question. Again, it's something that needs to be supported with very good and accurate metadata. Well, for team science, of course, there is a type of metadata that we're also using in our journals. The uptake could be a little bit higher, so that's also where we can collaborate on that. But it's also, we also have to be careful, because you could also say it's a step back, because it's about papers again, and we should also look at the data sets and the preprints and other types. Last week I was in a discussion and someone had put a DOI on a smell, a 200-year-old smell, and they put a DOI on that, and I thought it was brilliant. So there is also a variety of different outputs out there.
I can just add that looking at the feasibility of the project that they want to do, then you need today a different setup of persons also. So you need to be able to assess also, is this feasible to achieve with this set of people? So I mean, in that sense, it has changed and will change in the future also.
Yeah, I was going to say there's so many areas of research right now where you really can't do it on your own. You really have to put together a team. So I think it's a very good question, and I'm not surprised it's coming from all over, because we do have to be able to evaluate individuals, but within the group, that we have to move forward on that. So I think that's very important. Did you have more questions?
Yeah, there's another question which is very interesting. It's more like also a group of questions that came directly after the keynote. Actually, there's one researcher that said that he had the feeling that open science was just there, and no one ever told him how to use it for research assessment and how to move on. And he is really asking the honest question, how can we help the research, or how do you think the researchers on the ground can help to actually properly implement this and actually also lead to the cultural change where what was discussed already today several times?
That's a great question.
That's a very nice, very honest
Thank
question.
you for that question. I think I'll start with Nicolas, since it was based on your presentation, and then I'll let all of you have a shot.
So I'm sorry, I had a 2-second break on the question and I didn't hear everything. So if you just can repeat the question.
The question is, how can anyone help actually researchers, or also senior and experienced researchers, to include open science in their research assessment, all aspects of open science?
How can researchers help to include open science in research assessment? Well, as I was talking about finding assessors. And when we're dealing with research assessment, we need people from various disciplines. So if you have to read a narrative CV from I take example in my field in physics, well, you cannot pick someone in social science and humanities to look at that narrative CV. So the question is, you have to find someone in physics and not so far away from the discipline. So if any people want to help, well, become assessor, and also before becoming assessor, train yourself on what is open science and how you could evaluate with regard with open science. And that's a difficult question. The criteria and so on are difficult questions. So what you could do also is get acquainted with the research that's been done on that side. I mentioned one paper, which is research on research, but there are many others than that, and start to get acquainted with that. I am a researcher in physics, and I tried to go deeper in this research meta science, and it's fascinating. Not so easy to do, but it takes a little bit of time, but it helps. And so go into that, become assessors, and come help us to do the assessment.
Thank you. And I'd like to say, Nicolas, would you share that paper later on with the proceedings from this conference? If others would like to read it, that would be nice, I think.
It's the link is on my presentation. If you share it, so I can give you the link. It's not a paper of mine. It's a paper I just read.
Great. And so, like a 1-minute response from all of you. Would you like to start, Katarina?
Yeah, very short. I think incentives. On top of that, you need incentives, and as has been said before, this takes time from this system we have today, and it's if the change should come, I think the researchers need incentives for themselves, for their merits. So.
Well, incentives, of course, resources, guidance, institutional steering, good policies. What else?
I was going to say, but the question was, how can he help, she help?
Well, I mean, for each one of these, of course, you have to see, like, institutional policies, that's the institutional leadership that has to take a lead.
Yeah.
And
so depending on where you are in your
at the
career.
level of the institution. Yeah. Guidance could also be, for example, societies that provide guidance to, especially to early career researchers who, for the first time, move into peer review, for example, etc. So now I didn't, for each example, say who is in charge, because sometimes it's actually also more than one entity or one person. Or one
funders also have a responsibility, of course, to drive the system, of course.
Can I have a go at 5 quick tips?
Absolutely.
On top of open science, I think it's important just for the researcher. And what can they do? I think just put your ORCID on everything, right? Publish your data set somewhere and link to it. Publish to make sure there's a link to your grant. If possible, use credit as much as possible. And lastly, consider a preprint. So if you do those 5 things, actually, there's already a lot achieved, because your librarian can find a lot of these items together, and you're creating more transparency than there was before. So it's a very simple thing, and it doesn't need to cost too much time or effort.
It's a very simple thing. Ah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
We take that with a grain of salt, but that's very concrete. Thank you. We have time for one last question.
There was one person who asked, like, how to best acknowledge the effort of participatory research that also, for example, includes citizens, that also, for example, includes other multidisciplinary part that does not always produce the typical scholarly outputs. Difficult one.
Yeah, for a last question, that's good. Does anyone want to take a shot? Nicolas? Yes, please.
Yeah, and in fact, you have one example of the dots in my presentation, which meant I forgot many things. In fact, that's one aspect of research outputs. You have many others, data going to the public and research software and so on. So there's no. I don't have any definitive answer, but the idea is that in your narrative CV, you acknowledge all of research products, and this is clearly one. Citizen science is clearly one of the research products and research activities.
Thank you.
Hope that helps.
Well, thank you. Our time has run out. I would like, on behalf of EuroScience, to thank our wonderful speakers today. And of course, the audience here and online, and for participating with very nice questions. If you enjoy discussions of this type, you'll enjoy ESOF, and we welcome you to Poland ESOF in 2024 for more discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and the panel.
Thank you.
Yes.